there has been lots going on, so we'll try and cover a lot of it. The biggest thing that has happened in the last 10 days or so has been the Supreme Court decision in the Calais case, and I'm sure most of you have heard of it. I did copy into the briefing document what we put into the newsletter, which basically gives a little bit of background about the Voting Rights Act and from the Brennan Center, as well as the implications of the voting rights decision. And essentially what the decision does is eviscerate the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was the part of the Voting Rights Act where individuals or groups could sue for issues related to racial discrimination, difficulty in accessing the ballot for racial minorities, lack of representation for racial minorities. And essentially, they created a bar that is almost impossible to surmount, to be able to prove that, rather than looking at the impact of policy, they would have to undeniably demonstrate that there was racism was the cause and the only cause for any sort of election policy. So even if it was disproportionately impacting racial minorities, that is not enough to overturn something. So that is hugely significant, obviously, because that's been a primary tool in ensuring access to the ballot and access to representation for minority voters, and also creating districts that are majority minority voters so that they can have the ability to elect a representative or senator, representative of their choosing that would really represent their interests. So almost immediately after that decision came out, Southern states have raced to change their electoral maps, even for elections that were currently underway, like in Louisiana, and in states where doing this kind of gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, is against the Constitution. So Florida, for instance, and Tennessee both have prohibitions in their Constitution for doing redistricting on a partisan basis or doing redistricting in between the decade census, but they have rushed to change their maps for the 26th election, and the Supreme Court has said that is okay for them to do. So we are seeing kind of a rush to the bottom in terms of gerrymandering, and I think that this is the reason why we really need national legislation around prohibiting partisan gerrymandering. But in the short term, the good news is that there are activists in Rhode Island who have been working for a year in preparation for this decision, and working with the Supreme Court, with the Secretary of State, to introduce Rhode Island Voting Rights Act. And so it has already been submitted by the Secretary of State, and it is going to be considered in the Senate and the House, along with a series of amendments. And so if you feel frustrated by the Supreme Court decision, there is some very tangible things you can do here in Rhode Island. You can send a letter to your General Assembly members to support the Voting Rights Act and the amendments. And there is also a Voting Rights Act lobby day on May 21st at the State House. So the links for both the activation to write to your legislators, as well as information to on the lobby day are also in the briefing document, so that you can have those. The other thing on the federal level is the SAVE Act, which is voting legislation at the federal level that is would require individuals, in order to register to vote or to re-register to vote, you would need to bring citizenship documents, official citizenship documents, in person to the Secretary of State's office in order to validate that you are a citizen. Many people do not have those documents on hand, their birth certificate or a passport. It costs money to get those. They may have issues with transportation or disability and not be able to go in person to the Secretary of State's office. There are also issues with you need to show documentation with the name that corresponds to that citizenship documentation. So for married women, for instance, your current name may not match your birth certificate name. And so that creates a whole issue about whether you would be able to vote because your documentation doesn't match your current name. The other component of the SAVE Act is that it would prevent nonprofits from doing nonpartisan voter registration, because you need to bring all of your documents in person to the Secretary of State's office. And so that would mean that nonpartisan voter registration drives would be prohibited. So there is also a link in the briefing document to weigh in on the SAVE Act. Our delegation has been very supportive of voting rights, and so you can just reaffirm your appreciation for their opposition to the SAVE Act, but it is another way that you can weigh in response to what has happened in the Supreme Court decision. Most scholars that I've been reading and hearing have been talking about essentially the Supreme Court decision moves the issues to the state level. And so it's really important that individual states take the action that they need to protect voting rights at the state level. So again, May 21st is the lobby day for the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act. Any questions about voting rights? Okay. We will move on to the budget. Finally, the House passed the remaining FY26 budget bill for the Department of Homeland Security, and that covered all of the aspects of the department aside from immigration and border security. That is essentially what the Democrats have been asking for all along. That finally passed, and President Trump signed it into law, so that now, like the Coast Guard and TSA, the Secret Service, FEMA, all of those are now funded for FY26. FY26 only has a few months left, but they are officially funded for the rest of the fiscal year. The Republicans are trying to do a reconciliation bill that would be able to pass the Senate with only Republican votes, that would provide additional funding for immigration and border security. So those departments have been operating out of HR 1, which is the reconciliation bill from last year. So it's not like they haven't been funded, because they were given $70 billion or $80 billion from that bill. So they have been able to continue to work during the shutdown. But the reconciliation process would provide additional support of, I think it's $70 billion on top of what they had received from the reconciliation bill, the previous reconciliation bill. So they are still working on the framework for that. They did adopt a framework that may be able to pass the Senate. The question is if they're going to try and include some other components to that reconciliation bill that might get thrown out. The president in the past has asked them to include the SAVE Act in the reconciliation bill. It's likely that the parliamentarian, unless the parliamentarian is the one who rules on whether it can actually proceed as a reconciliation bill, because you can only have budgetary items in a reconciliation bill. So anything that doesn't have a budgetary implication, it cannot be included in that. And they may come up with a way to have some sort of a cost or fees or something with the SAVE Act in order to include it, but that is still a question. But the government is now fully funded through the end of September. But they have now started the appropriations process for FY27. The House is further along than the Senate is. The House appropriations committees have passed several of the appropriation subcommittees have done markups on several of the agency appropriations bills, agriculture FDA, National Security and State Department, Financial Services, Military Construction, Veterans Affairs have all had their markups in the House. Mid-May, they're supposed to release the Labor, HHS, and Education bill, which will impact many of the programs that you work with. So that has yet to be fully released yet, but they are working on that. The Farm Bill finally passed, 224 to 200. That is what authorizes, obviously, farm-related and agriculture-related issues, but also food stamps and food assistance programs. So it finally passed, but it has not passed in the Senate yet, and there's still disagreement on some of the measures that are put in by the House. So the Senate is looking to remove some of the controversial components of the bill, but the Democrats are still concerned about the access to nutrition programs. The Farm Bill does not address or undo any of the SNAP eligibility requirements that were in last year's reconciliation bill. So that remains a concern for Democrats. In terms of WIC, which is the Women, Infant, and Children funding, the Agriculture Subcommittee released the 2027 appropriations bill, and it cuts the program's fruit and vegetable benefit for more than 5 million participants, which are expecting parents and young children. And so advocates are trying to work with the Senate Appropriations Committee to ensure that WIC is funded at a stable level. There is a action step you can take about WIC and another one about SNAP through the United Way Worldwide Action Center at the end of the briefing document. So that is kind of where the budget stands right now. They're trying to go through regular order to get the appropriations bills passed. I know that Senator Collins in particular is very interested in doing that on the Senate side. The issue is with the upcoming election, there is a high likelihood that they will do a lot of work and then kind of punt until the new Congress has been seated. because things will turn out very differently depending on who's in charge in Congress. And so in my conversations with some Senate staffers, their feeling was it's highly likely that there will be probably a continuing resolution and punting the rest of it until the new Congress is seated in January. So there is a possibility that it will go through regular order, but also probably a larger possibility because essentially what happens in Congress will slow to a halt after September, essentially, because everyone is out on the campaign trail. And then once the election happens in November, then you have lame ducks. And so there's really not a lot that happens at the end of the year because people are waiting for the new Congress to be seated in January. So we'll see how far they get during the summer on the budget, but there is also a high likelihood of having a continuing resolution that basically delays the process. And especially considering they haven't had a budget that has gone on the traditional calendar in 10 years, probably. And so in an election year, it is even less likely. Any questions about the budget? So other things going on in Congress. I've talked before about the fact that Congress has had extensive hearings about fraud in federal benefits as well as fraud in nonprofits. And the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee voted at the end of April to approve 9 bills intended to address fraud and improper payments in federal programs. They need to be voted on the House floor, and then they will go to the Senate. One bill that National Council of Nonprofits has actively opposed is called Stopping Fraudulent Payments. It's 8464. And it would allow agencies to delay, condition, or segment federal payments if they have, quote, sufficient reason to determine, unquote, the payment presents an elevated risk of fraud. So in essence, if they have a feeling, they could stop payment on at least some of the funding that they had contracted with. Obviously, as a nonprofit, we want to ensure that there isn't fraud. At the same time, to not have actual documented proof of fraud and stop federal funding puts nonprofits in a really difficult position because it is, on what basis would you be stopping the payment of these funds? There's a list in the policy document about the other bills, but I just wanted to pull HR 8464 out in particular because of the potential implications for nonprofits. Some of the other ones are dealing more with the actual administration of federal benefits, which doesn't necessarily involve nonprofits. There has been some Democratic pushback on the IRS investigations of nonprofits. The Democrats on the House Ways and Means Committee have demanded that the IRS defend, the letter says that the IRS has compiled lists of Democratic donors and left-leaning nonprofit organizations and is moving to label these groups as domestic terrorists. So the committee members have been asking the IRS to provide information about whether this report is true and what information they have requested from these groups and who put together the list of those groups. So they have not had that resolved, but they have asked for additional information from the IRS about that. There's been legislation proposed called the Immigrant Resettlement and Welfare Abuse Prevention Act, which would require nonprofits serving refugees to report annually on the number of non-citizens the organizations assisted, and whether they had access to federal benefits. It is lawful to do both of those things. I mean, immigrants aren't eligible for a lot of federal benefits, so that would not be happening in most cases. But the policymakers said that this is needed to prevent fraud, but didn't have any evidence for that. So it is another space where they're trying to get information about immigrants and data from nonprofits. So that has not been voted on, but has been proposed. There was legislation that was proposed about consumer privacy, and it fully exempts all 501c3 nonprofit organizations from the requirements, but it is listed in the document. So if you want to go in and look at what it covers, there's also a reference document from Independent Sector about data privacy and artificial intelligence resources for nonprofits. So it would not impact nonprofits because it has a carve out, but I just wanted to highlight that. There's been legislation introduced on foreign donations to nonprofits. It would revoke tax exempt status from any nonprofit that accepts contributions or gifts from citizens or nationals of foreign adversary nations, including China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and other countries designated by the Treasury Secretary. So that has not been voted on yet either, but it seeks to prevent foreign donations. The House Ways and Means Committee, on a good note, there's actually a few good notes. One is the House Ways and Means Committee unanimously approved 6 bipartisan bills to modernize the John H. Chafee Foster Care Program for Successful Transition to Adulthood. That's our John Chafee, so that's a good thing. Those 6 bills did advance out of committee, so that's a good thing. There's also a resolution in the Senate led by Senator Kaine and co-sponsored by both Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse to overturn the new requirements on public service loan forgiveness. Essentially, the Department of Education has narrowed the eligibility for nonprofits to be eligible employers for nonprofit staff to get public service loan forgiveness. And this resolution would seek to overturn that, to broaden it back to the original state where all nonprofits are eligible employers for this. And just want to say thank you to Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse for being co-sponsors of that resolution. We also had a great delegation response there's a House congressional letter in support of the Combined Federal Campaign, which is sort of it's a workplace campaign for federal employees. And the administration is trying to shut it down. Both Representative Amo and Representative Magaziner, in response to our request, signed on to that letter. So again, we're appreciative of their work there. And lastly, we also had Senator Reid and Congressman Magaziner led congressional appropriations letters in support of including nonprofit workforce data in the quarterly data releases that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does. Right now, they only release nonprofit workforce data at best every 5 years, and by the time they release it, it's already 2 years old. So Senator Reed led a letter that was signed by Senator Whitehouse and a total of 26 senators across the country, asking for that nonprofit workforce data to be released every quarter. And then Representative Magaziner led the House letter, which was signed on by Congressman Amo as well. And there were 28 total House signers on that. So that's a jump in the number of members of Congress that have signed on to those letters, but we are really grateful to both our senators and House members for leading that effort nationally. They're the ones who have been the champions for getting that workforce data. And so we are grateful that our delegation has been a champion for that. So any questions about congressional action? Moving to the executive branch. Probably the biggest news on the nonprofit side has been the Department of Justice indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center for fraud. Basically what they said was that so if you don't know, the Southern Poverty Law Center is one of the biggest advocates against hate groups and white supremacist groups. Apparently 10 years ago or so, they had a strategy whereby they had paid informants in some of these white supremacist and hate groups who would give them information that they would pass on to law enforcement. And what the Department of Justice is asserting right now is that that was a fraudulent use of donor dollars, because they were telling their donors that they were fighting white supremacy and fighting against hate groups when they were actually funding them, because they were giving money to members of those groups. And so they have indicted them. A lot of large civil rights groups and national groups have released statements in support of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and as well as members of Congress who have condemned the actions as targeted against the adversaries of the administration. The area of concern is that for a long time we've been worried that the administration is going to weaponize this domestic terrorism terminology to go after nonprofits or to investigate them. And so far we have seen it being in this fraud space. It's been kind of the space that they have been leveling accusations. Democracy Forward has put together a list of resources to respond to threats and investigations. So that's included in the briefing document. We also, if you receive a letter, an investigatory letter of any kind requesting documentations or saying that you're under investigation, please, 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 first thing, let us know so we can connect you with the Lawyers Committee so that you can have pro bono representation, and they will help you to navigate that. But please do not try and navigate that on your own. Please let us know, because we also want to join with national efforts to prevent this kind of politicized investigations and accusations. So please let us know if that happens. Hopefully it will not happen here in Rhode Island, but we do know of at least one nonprofit in Rhode Island that has been under investigation. So also on the fraud side, the Treasury has announced that the IRS plans to revise the 990 form in order to, quote, detect misconduct and hold wrongdoers accountable. They they are particularly interested in how nonprofits report on government grants and contracts and fiscal sponsorship arrangements. I'm not really sure how changes on the 990 are going to help them discover fraud in that, but if they go through the regular process, there should be a public comment period, and so we will help you get activated to weigh in on that. We are also waiting for the comment period to open for the changes to the SAM application process. I mentioned this on the last call, but they are trying to create a certification process when you apply for your SAM number or reapply for your SAM number that would require you to certify that you don't promote gender ideology, that you don't support illegal immigration, those kinds of things. And it will definitely be challenged in court once it is implemented. But before that happens, there'll be another public comment period, and we'll need to, again, rally nonprofits to weigh in on the second comment period before any sort of final decision is announced. Those of you who work with SAMHSA, there's some new substance abuse disorder guidance that there's links in the document. Not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to go into it, but there are some links in there. There's some changes to student loan borrowing and repayment from the Department of Education. Those are in the briefing document. So if you have student loans, please, or you have colleagues who have student loans, please encourage them to look at it. There's a fact sheet from the Department of Education as well. The Administration for Children and Families has this initiative called Home for Every Child, and there are 14 states that have joined that, including Rhode Island. And so I noted that with some information about it in the briefing document. CMS has issued guidance about federal Medicaid and CHIP funding in terms of support for certain populations of immigrants. This does not apply to green card holders, Cuban and Haitian immigrants, but it will impact healthcare access for most immigrants because the state won't receive matching funds from Medicaid or CHIP for refugees, asylees, parolees, and victims of trafficking. So it will have a really big impact on our neighbors who fall into those categories. But if you want to learn more about that, there is a link in the briefing document. This is basically it's not something that is different than HR 1. It's basically the implementation of the changes in HR 1. So it's not like it's a new, it's not new news, but it is implementation of HR 1. Anybody have questions about Congress? I mean, executive branch. Okay. Litigation. There is, I think I mentioned last time, but I put it in here again because I couldn't remember when it happened, but the court determined that changes to continuum of care grants were illegal, which that happened in Rhode Island, so that's good. Just yesterday in Rhode Island District Court, the lawyers committee were in court with the ACLU asking the judge to quash a subpoena that was received by Rhode Island Hospital, asking for the medical records of youth receiving gender affirming care. And listening to the hearing, the judge was quite upset with the Department of Justice. So I think it's a fairly safe bet that she will be ruling in favor of the Lawyers Committee to prevent the DOJ from accessing those records. But just to let you know that that is an active case that is happening. There was a district court that had a preliminary injunction blocking the administration's restrictions on grants to support survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So that is good news as well. Another federal court upheld Medicaid funding for hospitals providing gender-affirming care to minors. And there are state attorneys general who are challenging new USDA certifications. So most things are winding up in court again, and we continue to see lower courts throughout most of the country, not all of the country, but through most of the country, are supporting the challenges to the federal actions. In Rhode Island, on the legislative side, the Voting Rights Act is the primary issue. The second one is nonprofit property tax exemptions. There is a bill that is pending in the General Assembly to create a study commission to revise the state property tax exemption statute. I testified at the hearing and basically said we are in support of that because there needs to be more clarity and transparency, but we need to have more representation on the study commission. In line with that, there was just a case in Rhode Island where PACE, that provides holistic care for seniors, they had applied for a property tax exemption in East Providence for a new facility and were denied that exemption. They took it to the state Supreme Court that ruled that the state statute is ambiguous, and when it is ambiguous, they have to rule in favor of taxation. So that is another impetus or a reinforcement of the need to do some work on the state statute, because if nonprofits are going to struggle to demonstrate that they are eligible because the statute is ambiguous, we want to make sure that we address that. The City of Providence has also started a nonprofit property tax exemption commission. They are on like a rocket schedule. The mayor created the task force in mid-April, and he wants to have a report and recommendations by the end of May, which is lightning fast. But I am serving on that working group. So if you have feedback or input that you would like me to relay, I'm happy to do so. In most states, I've been learning a lot about property tax exemptions across the country in preparation for these. And in most states, the eligibility is determined at the state level, and then applications come in at the municipal level, where the tax assessors determine whether nonprofits are eligible based on the state regulations. That is essentially the way that functions here in Rhode Island. The difficulty is that, number one, our state statute is not easy to understand. Number two, we have nonprofits who may not be qualified by the wording in the statute who go to their state legislator and say, can you put in a bill to make us eligible for a tax exemption? So there's like 60 nonprofits that are named in the statute as being tax exempt because there was a specific bill passed at the state level to say that they are tax exempt. It's not a good system to be like, we're having individual nonprofits go to the General Assembly to get their own tax exemption without that being equitably and transparently implemented across the state. So that is the biggest issue on our radar right now at the state level. And like I said, the House is looking to create a study commission for that, which would have a longer time frame than, I think they proposed 6 months. We suggested a year for that, so that there would be time to look at the financial implications and service implications of any changes that they would be suggesting as a result of the study commission. So anybody have any questions or input about the property tax exemption issue? If you do, please reach out to me. Love to hear any input that you have. There are some funding notices for in the end of the briefing document. The one note, I know a couple of you are in continuum of care, and in the president's budget, he basically zeroed out the continuum of care line in his budget. His budget is just a suggestion. It doesn't carry any more weight than him just saying what he would like. But he COC just is going to release the COC notice of funding, the current one, by June 1st. So that is happening. And then there's still discussions on the congressional level about funding for FY27, but the funding notice will be coming out. Oh yes, 1099, sorry about that. So we have been working on the issue of 1099 guidance that came from the Division of Taxation. Some of you may have received something saying that 1099s were going to be required for all income above $100, starting with tax year 2025, so retroactive to the previous year. That raised lots of concerns for nonprofits, so we have been engaging with the Division of Taxation as well as the Rhode Island Society of CPAs. The Rhode Island Society of CPAs went to the Division of Taxation and reported back that the Division of Taxation said that they were willing to align their regulations with the federal regulations, which would be the $600 threshold, which is great news. But they said it would require a change to state statute. Side note, I'm not sure it necessarily does, but that's okay. If they're willing to do that, that's fine. Which would mean the statute, it wouldn't be part of this General Assembly session. It would have to be for next General Assembly session. So our goal is to get something in writing from the Division of Taxation saying that nonprofits are not responsible for the retroactive 1099s to 2025, because we don't want you to be held responsible for this in that gap between getting a new bill that would make this clear. So I have going to be meeting with the taxation person from the Rhode Island Society of CPAs who has been in the conversation with the Division of Taxation and has a good relationship with them, so that the request for getting that in writing will come from both of us. And then as soon as we have that, I will make sure that everyone has access to that. So good news, but I won't feel confident until we have that in writing that you all can rely on, instead of just, this is what someone said in a conversation. Any other questions? So at the end of the briefing document, our action items that you can take. The biggest thing locally is going to be the Voting Rights Act lobby day on the 21st. But if you're interested in weighing in on SNAP or WIC or any of those other things, you can click on the United Way Worldwide action steps and take action that way. So I'll give you back 10 minutes into your day. And I will look forward to seeing you next month. We will not have a briefing the month of July, but we are hoping to get a session on the budget that gets passed in the General Assembly. So we are hoping to have a session about that. I will also note that we are we will be having our advocacy coaching cohort starting in August. So if any of you are interested in going deeper into advocacy, or if you have a special issue that you want to be working on for the 2027 General Assembly session, this is a great opportunity to go deeper. So registration will be coming out soon in the newsletter, and we will make that available if you're interested. And just lastly, we are going to be sending out information about Alliance membership that is being paid for this year by the Bar Foundation, but we want to make sure that we get you all re-registered on our new system. So you won't have to pay dues thanks to the Bar Foundation, but we do need you to register. We will need you to register on our new platform, on our new website. So you'll get information about how to do that soon. So thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.